So we're going to be reading from this book, Jailing a Rainbow, the Marcus Garvey Case, by Justin Hansford. Yeah, by Justin Hansford. Forgive me because the text is going to be small, but I promise you, you will be greater enlightened as we go through. Can I ask those on the panel to please not watch the YouTube and or mute themselves? Yeah, I'm hearing some feedback. Thank you very much, my elders. Much appreciated. Yeah, for your grace. All right. So the beginning on page 62 of the book, it says a counter narrative of the Black Star Line mail fraud. In February 1922, Mark Garvey and the 3 other Black Star Line officers faced 2 indictments that together contained 13 counts. The government eventually won a conviction against only Garvey. Yeah, so bear this in mind that there were 2 other individuals who were in the leadership, yes, of the Black Star Line Steamship Corporation, all right, running the Steamship Corporation, who were also charged. They were both acquitted. Yes, no charges were levied, further charges were levied against them, and they were not found guilty of any charges, of any of the 13 counts. Yeah, and listen, the government eventually won a conviction against only Garvey based on only one of the 13 counts against him. Yeah, so this is very important for us to understand, right? On only one of the 13 counts against Papa Garvey was he found guilty in this kangaroo court. Yes, and the other 2 individuals who were on trial with him were not found guilty of any of the 13 counts. All right. This count alleged that Garvey committed mail fraud by causing a letter to be mailed to Benny Dancy on December 20th, 1920, a letter which encouraged Dancy to buy stock in the Black Star Line, even though the Black Star Line at the time had no ships, was near ruin, and would never obtain any more ships or return to solvency. The mail fraud statute required 1, the existence of a scheme to defraud, and 2, the use of the US mail to effectuate or attempt to effectuate the scheme. On appeal, Garvey's lawyers would argue that the trial court had not established the second element, the use of the mails to effectuate the scheme. However, choosing to make this argument was a grave mistake. This is an analysis of an actual lawyer. Yes. In fact, the government did present sufficient evidence for the second element, but in this case, it did not present adequate evidence to satisfy the first element, the existence of the scheme to defraud. Although Garvey's case largely turned on the question of this first element, whether his activity qualified as a scheme to fraud, it is difficult to identify a precise statutory definition for fraud here because of the exceptionally wide net cast by the ambiguous terms of Section 215 of the Mail Fraud Act and its language prohibiting a scheme or artifice to defraud. Before Garvey's trial, the Durland case provided the authoritative definition of a scheme to defraud. At that time, Durland was quote, by far the most important of decisions in the mail fraud jurisprudence. In Durland, the court established that a scheme to defraud requires intent to defraud, which in turn requires knowledge of the fraud. In 2 clear statements, Durland set forth the intent requirement. It declared that the significant fact is the intent and purpose. The court also stated, quote, if the testimony had shown that the defendant, as its president, had entered in good faith upon that business, no conviction could be sustained, no matter how visionary might seem the scheme. Yeah. So if Papa Garvey has no knowledge of any fraud wagwan, he cannot be convicted of any crime. That's what all that long legalese is basically saying. All right. That's what all that means. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's continue. Legal point 1, the Black Star Line was not a scheme to defraud because Garvey had no intent to defraud. That's a subheading. In Garvey's case, The Durland analysis of whether the first element of the claim, the existence of a scheme to defraud, was satisfied, turned on whether the Black Star Line enterprise was created with the intent to defraud, or whether the Black Star Line advertisements were mailed with an intent to cheat the stockholders. Certainly, the Black Star Line officers engaged in unprofessional business practices that called the officers' judgment into question. For example, we'll leave the example, it's not important for now. Yeah. However, regardless of the impropriety of these acts, none of them could be understood to fulfill the legal definition of fraud pursuant to this statute. Instead, the poor business practices were merely mistakes from which none of the defendants benefited. Nobody was getting rich off the black. It's very important for us to understand this. Nobody was waxing themselves rich off of the Black Star Line. I want to know understand what going, yes, sir. All right. Least of anybody, Marcus Mosiah Garvey himself. Okay. It's very important for us to understand. All right. The larger question is, what motive did Garvey have to create a scheme to defraud? After confiscating the Black Star Line accounting records, the government found that Garvey took no money for his own personal use. I repeat, after confiscating the Black Star Line accounting records, the government found that Garvey took no money for his own personal use, and personal enrichment was not alleged in the indictment. If Garvey did not gain financially from the sale of the stock, what motive did he have to commit fraud? Although personal enrichment is not an element of the mail fraud statute, it is unlikely that the drafters contemplated that a fraud scheme in which someone would run an expensive time-consuming operation, such as a shipping company, for no personal benefit, would fall under the statute's purview. Indeed, Garvey had many financial incentives for making the Black Star Line a success. He was supposed to receive a salary of $10,000 a year from the Black Star Line, which never materialized once it went into decline. The Black Star Line board of directors determined whether Garvey would receive the salary. This decision, in turn, depend on the financial strength of the Black Star Line at the time. In addition, Garvey owned 200 shares of stock, which he purchased with his personal money. So when the Black Star Line went under, Garvey faced great financial loss. The premise of the conviction was that he intended to run the Black Star Line in a way that would cause it to never gain in value. Yet, in spite of this, sell stock at inflated price. However, because Garvey had so much of his personal financial fate invested in the project, by purposefully ruining the Black Star Line, Garvey would have lost thousands of dollars and gained nothing. Without any financial incentive, prosecutors would have the court believe that Garvey built this entire organization as one big practical joke, or out of mean-spiritedness alone. Yeah. So that's just a couple excerpts from the book, brothers and sisters. Jailing a Rainbow, the Marcus Garvey case by Justin Hansford. Yeah. So I thought that was important just to give some details from a legal perspective on the actual case. And I hope that helps ones and ones understand Wagwan Yassa and why we say that there is no conviction of Marcus Garvey that can be justifiable in the realm of Marcus Garvey being guilty of any crime.